Welcome to Critical Conversations in Children's Literature, a web series I developed to bring children's literary writers in conversations with scholars to discuss some of the hot topics within the field. My name is Daley. Hello, I am an assistant professor in the English Department, English and Comparative Literature Department here at San Diego State. And I am also the Children's Literature Director, as well as the Director for the National Center for the Study of Children's Literature. Yay! Today's conversation is centered on what does it take to become a full-time illustrator in the industry of children's literature. And today I have a special guest for you, Iris Quiroga. Thank you so much for being here. Just to tell you a little bit about Iris, she is an author and illustrator from California, but she is immensely influenced by her Colombian heritage. And regarding her work, she writes, "In my artwork, I find it most interesting when there are diverse textures, colors, and materials, all combining to tell stories with nuance and humor." Thank you, Iris, for joining me today for Critical Conversations.
Thank you for having me, LaShawn. It's really cool to be on one of your videos that I've watched them all, so now I feel like an honor.
To have a fan in-house, so great. I first want to have you start off by telling our viewers who may not know about you a little bit about yourself, and if you can also talk about your process when it comes to illustrating.
Yeah, so like LaShawn said, I'm from California, and I grew up in Northern California, to be specific, a little town between San Francisco and Yosemite National Park, and it's called Oakdale, really little. But yeah, my family's mixed. My dad's from Colombia, my mom's from the States, from California, and that really enriched my life growing up and now. And so yeah, that's an inspiration in my illustration and in my storytelling too, because I write about my heritage or my family or my culture too. So a few fun facts or little details. I like to play soccer. I like to go salsa dancing. And what else? I love reading. I mean, that one's probably pretty obvious, but my process, I do mixed media collage mostly. So what that means is that I use a bunch of different media. So I sometimes paint with acrylics or gouache or even watercolor sometimes, and then maybe use some colored pencil in there to get little details that I can't get so easily with the cut paper. But most of the time I just end up painting pages that I'll then cut out shapes from, and then gluing those down and then making my scenes or my images that way.
So as someone who's not an illustrator, I heard terms of gouache, I heard some terms of simple things that we typically learn how to use in elementary school, like color pencils, but that doesn't make everyone an illustrator just because you have access to these materials. Can you perhaps give us what you think in terms of being able to use these materials in terms of skill set? Like, what does it mean to be an illustrator and not just having access to materials?
Illustrations probably mostly defined or set apart by storytelling. So you're bringing to light or bringing to life text. So as an author illustrator, I write my own stories, although I'm looking forward to the day I can illustrate other people's writing too. But so I'll start with writing a manuscript, or maybe it's an idea from a sketch I've done, and then I'll get that going, and then I'll try to storyboard. Basically just means like break it up by page and then draw each scene and kind of look at the composition and what's going to go where and how I'm telling the story through color, through composition, basically just what's where on the page. And so illustration is what I do for the final art and for telling the story visually. So yeah, when I do collage, it's like I try to keep it a little more like loose and light, but at the same time, it's nice that you can cut and have like crisp edges to make illustrations look more like, I guess, professional or like well done in the way I like, at least for my skill set right now. But so illustrations basically is storytelling versus just making art or maybe painting something you see. If you did paint something like outside, like a scene, but then you added like a character or like so two characters interacting, then you start getting more of a story. And that's like where I find most interesting is telling stories visually.
That's really great. Thank you. Because otherwise I'm like, am I an illustrator because I doodle? Absolutely not. So in terms of storytelling, can you tell us a little bit about for you, perhaps in your own aesthetic or in your own work, or when you're seeing an illustrator or a picture book in particular, what makes a really great story for you?
I think there's a lot that is really kind of subtle that actually makes a great story, because there's some picture books that seem so simple and you have a thought like, I could have written that or I could have drawn that, but it's more about like the design choices behind it. And there's a lot of thinking that goes into that. So I think like a good picture book or a good story that's been illustrated well adds information in addition to the words. So the words will say something, but the pictures will also add to that and either tell a new story or it's kind of fun sometimes when they contradict, because then you're like, wait, like you're in on it. You can see that like, oh, the words are contradicting the picture, but then it all comes together to make to give you the full picture. So I think when illustrations don't just repeat the words, then that makes it more interesting, because you're getting more information and you can kind of take in a story in another way.
So I have two questions coming out of that. And this is something that we've talked about before in terms of the relationship with the author and illustrator, because you're saying, when is it really influential or when is it impactful for the illustrations not to exactly mimic what the text is saying, especially if you're not the author illustrator, if you're working with an author? And then the other thing I wanted to ask about is, in terms of age group, when is it important for the words and illustration to match? And when is it actually good for them when the illustration should go beyond the text?
Yeah. So that usually comes up when you're talking about early readers versus picture books. And early readers are for kids usually 5 to 8, I think is what I've like a detail I've looked up before. And those kids are trying to read on their own. So that's really helpful when the pictures do match exactly and like reflect the text exactly, because then they'll be kind of reassured what they read was correct and what they understood was correct. So yeah, that's early readers, and usually that can be repetitive in picture to words, and that's like what you want. That's like most helpful. And then picture books, which have a broader range, can be like 2 or 3 to 8, and those typically are read out loud by adults to kids, and the kids are also reading visually the images. But yeah, of course, like kids can read picture books on their own too. But those are for building the skill to like read something visually and read something, in text. But yeah, usually picture books, I think probably the biggest group of readers for that is probably like the younger 3 to 6 or so. So age does come into play, and also just their reading level and skill with reading and picking up things visually. But kids mostly in general, like, growing up and just around, you'll notice kids kind of just soak up things like sponges, right? So that is why it's so important for them to be able to read visually or like to have that help visually. Because they're kind of already doing it in the world and in their families and in their communities too. So
yeah, visual literacy. We talk about that in terms of media is really important too.
Yeah.
And so then the other question around, when is it okay or perhaps helpful or impactful when the illustration is contradictory and or isn't what the author expected when it comes to the text and the illustration?
Yeah, that's probably case by case basis. But I mean, most of the time how it works is that an author will write a manuscript, and this is if we're talking traditionally published, like through a publishing company. So an author will write their manuscripts, and then a company will pick it up, and then they'll find the illustrator who they want to work with it. They like it that way because they have lots of experience, they've published lots of books, and so they kind of like have an idea of like who would bring out that story best, or who would do a complementary visual story to match it best. So that's kind of why they keep it separate. I think if you really need some questions answered that are really important to the plot of the story, then I would imagine that's fine to reach out to the author. Or like maybe you go through your agent or the art director, and then they talk to the editor, and the editor talks to the author. But it's also part of that's the cool part, is that someone like you have an idea in your head what the story is as an author, and then the illustrator has their interpretation of it. So it's kind of cool to get a different perspective. So it's nice when they can kind of go a different route, and then it becomes something you never imagined it could be. So that's like the magic of collaboration. Even though it's not very direct collaboration, it still is, because you're working with author's text, maybe editor's notes, art director's, guidance and notes, and then your own perspective. So it's really a team effort.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more of a team than I feel like most people think, oh, it's just author, illustrator.
Yeah.
But really, as you're saying, it's a full team, a full collaboration. There's lots of people who have a say in this process. And so I want to quickly transition to what you were saying about the self-publishing industry, of what generally happens with an author and the illustrator, where there is a vision that the author has, and so they self-select an illustrator who they feel can bring about that vision. Can you perhaps maybe just talk about if there are differences you see in how you would go about self-publishing, if that's something you would do, or do you think it's really important for people who are thinking about becoming an illustrator really consider more the lines of traditional publishing? Just what are your thoughts about that?
Neither one is better than the other. It's just different. They're just different, really. Like traditional publishing, you're kind of trusting a lot of other people in producing this book and making it the best it can be. And also it's nice because you don't have so much responsibility, like as if you were self-publishing. You have to do some marketing yourself because it's your book, you want to promote it. But they might help with marketing. They're obviously doing all the printing of the book and designing of the book and distribution and all that. So that's a lot of the heavy lifting of actually producing the physical book that's taken away. With self-publishing, it's more like, are you comfortable kind of starting your own business? Because you have to worry about advertising it and marketing it. And if you're not confident in design, then maybe you want to hire a designer. And then again, if you're the author and you don't know how to illustrate and you have to hire an illustrator, so that comes out of your pocket also. Distribution is even more challenging because so I work part-time in a bookstore in La Jolla. We'll get authors come in every now and then who are self-published, and they want to just talk to the book buyer. But it is more difficult because the bookstore really only buys from Ingram, which is like a distribution company. So basically, it's just harder to get a self-published book into a store. That's just a very big challenge that I don't know how successful it actually is. But it's not to say that the bookstores like that, like independent bookstores, don't want to even touch self-published books. They do like outreach events, like Warwick does weekends with locals on Sundays. So then those authors can come, and it's kind of like being sold on consignment. And they have an event and they have a table out and it's advertised through the store and they can get some visibility there. But basically self-publishing is just a lot more work. But it's a lot more control, and obviously you get all the profit. So if you wanted to go that route, it's just more about finding the right team or building up the skills if you want to do it all yourself. But it's not always so fun to, like, I probably won't pursue doing any books that are self-published, whether it's like an author who's self-publishing, or I won't try to self-publish my own books because I don't want to start my own business. And also, like, many authors who are just really new to books and they're trying to self-publish, they don't know that the best thing about picture books is that collaboration. They just really want their vision the way they see it, done like exactly how they want,
I respect that. I like that thought about picture books being a part of the collaboration versus self-publishing is about a singular vision. And not to say, again, that one is better than the other, but understanding that there's more to picture books than just one person's vision that it really takes on the industry, it takes on what other authors are doing, what other illustrators are doing, and then what is actually happening in the publishing house where you're publishing. Yeah. That's really great. Another question I wanted to ask was, what does it take to launch into this field of children's literature, both as an author and illustrator and or as an author illustrator?
Yeah, it takes a lot of work and probably a lot of patience, definitely perseverance. Like, in my head, I'm just like, oh, it'll probably be like 5 or 10 years before I actually really break into the industry full time. But you never know. But it's nice to have better expectations like that, or like more realistic ones, because it's very crowded, but it's also, there's gatekeepers. Most publishers only want to receive work from an agent, and it's really hard to get an agent. So that takes time, but it's really just working on your craft a lot, and keeping going, like some tips I would suggest are finding like a critique group, taking online classes, maybe finding communities to join, organizations like the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. That's really helpful. They have conferences, resources, like contacts. Yeah, that one's great. But it takes a lot, and it probably takes many years to like get to that full-time like status, I guess. And even after that, it's like, ooh, you gotta keep working hard. It's always a hustle, because you gotta work to get more book, contracts and more book deals even after the first. So
who would you want to work with? What illustrators or authors on your mind that if you were to break in at some point, anytime, right? Because it's only a matter of time for you, who would you want to be working with?
Well, publisher-wise, let's say I really like the Chronicle books. I think they have great taste. And there's also a lot of like smaller independently owned publishers. Like, I think Barefoot Books is a good one. Lee and Low also has a lot of diverse books, which I think is cool. Charles Bridge seems pretty solid, and that they go for even like bilingual books, which I think is great. I definitely would love to get book deals with like one of the big, is it 5 now? Like Penguin House,
the top 5.
Hachette,
Macmillan,
Simon Schuster. Mm-hmm. Is that 4 now? It might be 4 now. Yeah, as far as authors, I haven't even dreamed that big, because I'm like, other than you. Not really though, but yeah, I haven't thought that far, honestly. Like, I'm just like, okay, let me try to work on my book dummies, get an agent, and then I'll think, I guess because I feel like I wouldn't have much say, or I'd be the one writing the books too. Mm-hmm. But it would be wonderful to collaborate with you, with Matt, with like other people, who that will be coming in the years to come from the MFA program. Like, who knows? I think it'll be great. But and that'd be fun to also illustrate a book, like co-illustrate a book with someone. Yeah, one of my good friends is Raisa Figueroa, who's an amazing illustrator, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if there would be a way to like mix our styles, because she does digital art and I do collage, so it's like, oh, that'd be really fun to do a book together in somewhere. But yeah, that's a great question. I should think more about that, because that is a good dream to think about, and that's what keeps you going.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've never heard of collaboration amongst illustrators, which would be really interesting to think about, because often we, again, think about just the author-illustrator relationship, but 2 illustrators or perhaps even 2 authors. Yeah, no,
it's definitely been done. There's definitely been multi-author books. And then recently, one book I liked that was co-illustrated was, I think it was by Julie Foliano, and it was called I Don't Care. And it was out just like a few months ago. It came out. But and then the 2 illustrators are real life best friends, Molly Idle and Juana Martinez Neal. So they got to illustrate a book together, and it was about friendship. So I was like, that's so perfect.
Yeah, that 100% makes sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can also talk about some of the hidden costs of what it means to, some of the hidden costs that it takes to try to break into the industry. You talked earlier about workshops, or perhaps even purchasing all of these materials, right? You have to have the software to get your work out there. What are some of those hidden costs for you?
Yeah, you're right. That's so funny. It's like hidden to me too, because it's just part of it. But it's good to bring that to note. Like, for example, SCBWI, what I mentioned earlier, the society, they have like an annual fee. I think it's around $100. something like that. But so that's a cost. If you're taking online classes, not all of them are free. So certificate programs sometimes are, well, the one I took for children's book illustration through UC San Diego's extension program, that was it? It was like a few hundred a class or something, or maybe in total. Yeah, it was in the hundreds, and then added up, I think, to almost 1,000 for all my classes in the whole certificate program. Then there's buying supplies. And of course, you know, if you're doing traditional art, then that that can add up. If you're doing digital and you use like Procreate or, well, Procreate, I'm not sure if you have to pay a subscription for it, but that's the drawing program that's on iPads.
Then you need an iPad.
Then you need an iPad.
Yeah.
So, but then if you do like Photoshop on a PC or wherever, then that requires a subscription, I think, for the Adobe Creative Cloud subscription. And then there's like, well, yeah, if you like books, then you're gonna want to buy books, and you're gonna want to buy the books you're interested in making. Like, so I bought a lot of picture books, so so that's another cost.
Even recently, you went to an event in New York.
That's right. Yeah, conferences aren't cheap. The conference, and as a member of SDSU, though, yeah, it's probably a little bit less, but not that much. It was about, I want to say, $675 for the conference registration fee, and then it's hotels and flights and food for the weekend you're there, the days you're there. So yeah, these things add up, but I guess that they're hidden to me is kind of what I mentioned, because I just think of it as like an investment, and that, that's my goal. That's what I'm kind of investing my time and money in a lot. So, time is another one you could consider, because I try to use up whatever time I can. So like all my lunch breaks are sketching or working on like a book dummy or something. It's like, yeah, or writing in my free time, or in the evenings I work on my art. So definitely that, has a cost in that you're not doing something else. So
can you talk a little bit about even juggling jobs, right? You've talked about this position, you talked about also working at Warwick's. How does that impact even your relationship to time to spend on your work?
Yeah, luckily these two jobs, well, the first one I used to work in a university before. So when I moved to San Diego, or was thinking about moving, it was kind of natural to look there first. And then I thought, oh, well, I'm going to apply to this one because it's in the English department and maybe there's some contacts. So that ended up being very much the case. For example, this woman sitting right next to me, and so that, being in that environment is really motivating. And yeah, like all the grad students who are talking about their writing, the teachers who have their writing also and are working on it, or they're putting on events with speakers and I can go to those, or I made the flyer for it, like that kind of thing. It's really motivating and just pushes me more towards it. And then I did need a second job when I moved here, or I decided like, I think I'll be more comfortable if I get like maybe another 1 day a week job. So then I thought, well, what can also kind of like help me in this, big goal I have. So then that's when I asked Warwick's if they were hiring, and they were. Thank God. Yeah. So then I got a job there, and that's been really cool because they have lots of author and illustrator events, so I get to meet and network there, and I just know what's current, and I'm just around books, and I'm like their kids' point person on Saturdays, so that's even cooler because then I can like feel more motivated to know the market and just know what kind of art is out there, what kind of stories are out there. And yeah, so that both of those jobs have been very like helpful in motivating me. And even though it's tough, like juggling two jobs and then like this side, like,
your
hustle,
third job,
my third job, essentially my side hustle. Yeah, it's since they all kind of feed into each other, it makes it like a lot less tiring, I guess, because it's all exciting and motivating.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so my last question for you today is, what are some tips that you have for people who are interested in cracking into the industry? And if there was something you would have done differently, what would that have been?
Tips I would say are find your community, find other people who are trying to do the same thing as you. And that could be online. It's not necessarily that you have to meet people, in your city or something. Reach out to people. One of my closest friends that I had mentioned earlier, Riza, I just reached out to her on email. I found her on like some article about Latinx and Kids Lit. And then I saw that it said she was from San Diego, and I wrote her an email and I just said, "Are you still in San Diego? I'm looking to like find others who, want to get together and draw or have a little community, So then that's how we hit it off and started it. And then from there it kind of just grows. But basically you have to seek it out though. Or just even make it yourself. I started with Riza, a group called the San Diego Latina Illustrators. And it's really like, sounds really formal, but it's like, it's quite informal. We just meet once a month to like draw, maybe at a cafe or a park or something, or we go to events or something together. And it's just to kind of, again, have that community and like answer each other's questions or motivate each other or check in to see how our projects are going. Send that cold email, or go to that author event and say, "Hey, my name's Iris, and I'm also looking to become an illustrator or author." All those things kind of reach into it, but main thing is just work at it and don't listen to the voice that's like, you're never gonna make it, or like, you're not improving. Like, don't listen to that voice. Just be like, great, thanks for your feedback. and then continue working, because you will get better and you'll get closer and closer, each minute you spend on your work. And it can be by the minute. Like sometimes it's only 20 minutes on my lunch break, I draw or do something or think about drawing. And some days I can't get to it in the evening, but every bit counts. So those are my main wins. I guess reach out to online classes. There's good ones, like I mentioned earlier, the UC San Diego Extension, SDSU, San Diego State also has certificate programs. I've done classes with Storyteller Academy, the illustration department, SBS Learn, which is the School of Visual Learning, visual storytelling. And they have a great children's book illustration program. And there's a lot of resources out, but you just got to seek it out.
We'll make sure to put those links in the description box below. Lastly, what would you have done differently?
So far, I don't think I would have done anything differently. Like, in this journey, I've listened to some like good advice I've heard, which is just enjoy the journey. I'm like, okay, I will try to take that one to heart and remind myself when I'm not enjoying it for some reason. But I think, I don't know that there's anything I would do different, because as long as I'm still pursuing it, then something will come, some opportunity, some new connection or networking event, or a new book that inspires me, or new artists that I discover on Instagram or something. So far I feel like I don't have any regrets, or like, I would tweak that a little bit. Like, they've all really been helping me move forward in this.
That's great to hear. I'm glad that I'm also a part of your journey now.
Totally.
It took a very long time to get Iris on the show. So grateful to have you on Critical Conversations with Children's Literature, and perhaps we can have you again once everything comes out. Like, sure. I'm going to need to email your agent and say, can I please have a second episode? An update. An update video would be great. Thank you so much, Iris.
Thank you, Bashan. So fun.